And we're holding on 88b2 in the right hand corner, in the right hand column, where the Mishnah says Shochach, the slave forgot. So just to remind, the Mishnah, which is right above, which is on 88b1, if you want to look at it, it says like this. Shochach, and you forget Masha Amalai Rabbi. He forgot what his master told him. In other words, whether he wants a sheep or he wants a goat. Remember, the Korban Pesach can be brought by with either a sheep or a goat. And he forgot what the master wanted. So Kate said, yeah, so what does he do? I'm reading from the Mishnah. Yishchat Telev v'gedi. He slaughters both a sheep and a goat. Yomi, he says, in Gedi Amali Rebbe, if my master wanted a goat, Gedi Shaloi, the goat will be his. V'teleh Shali, and the sheep will be mine. V'im Teleh Amali, if he wanted the other one, he wanted a sheep, right? Teleh Shaloi v'Gedi Shali. Fine. So now comes the Gemara and says, Shochach Masha Amaloi Rabbi, says the Gemara, Shali. The slave says, and the other animal will be mine, my Korban Pesach. 88b2, the bottom of 88b2. Shali, what it could that it's going to be mine. Masha Kana Eved Kana Rabbi, but we have this fast rule. Whatever the slave acquires, the master acquires. The slave, we're talking about an Eved Kanani, a Goyish slave owns nothing. He's completely the property of the owner. So therefore, whatever he acquires, the owner acquires. So how could the Mishnah say that if the slave forgot what kind of animal he wants to bring for a Korban Pesach, a sheep or a goat, he should bring both a sheep and a goat. And he should say, if my master wanted the sheep, then the goat is mine. Or if he wanted a goat, the goat is my master's and the sheep is mine. There is no such thing as mine, right? Which then becomes a problem that you would just mekadesh, you made holy two animals for one offering. And that's always problematic. Says the Gemara, we're now on 88b3. 88b3. Amar Abaya, you're right. So it has to be, it's much more particular, the case of the Mishnah. He goes, the slave goes to a shepherd, a roya, like Moshe. Moshe is called Moshe Raya Mehemna, the faithful shepherd. So he goes to a shepherd who does business with his master. So there's a very close relationship. Who is obviously the shepherd wants to make the master happy because he does business with him. So he understands where we have a problem now that we don't know what the master wants for his Korban Pesach, a sheep or a goat. So he goes like this. So the shepherd then gives over to the slave two animals, almanas, on the condition that the master has no rights to it, meaning he essentially says, we're going to do a transaction without consideration. We're always going to do transactions without consideration. I'm going to make it work. One animal is definitely the owner's, the master's, and the other animal, I'm sort of going to give it to you, slave, as a gift. I'm giving it to you. It's really my animal that I'm allowing you to use. In that way, you get around the problem of two animals that have been mekadesh for Korban Pesach. Says the Mishnah Baita. Now we got the other way. Shochach Rabbi, the master himself forgets. What is it that he told the slave? Did he tell the slave to bring a sheep for him or a goat for him? And obviously the slave also forgot what his master said. The answer is that both animals are burnt. Both animals are burnt, but nonetheless, he no longer has to bring a Pesach Sheni. He's already mekayim his mitzvah of bringing the Korban Pesach. He doesn't eat from it. So obviously the answer is, at the time of the Shechita, or at the time of the Zerika Sadam, at the time of spraying the blood, one of these two animals was the correct animal. One of these animals wanted. Let's say he wanted a sheep. The sheep was what he wanted. The only problem is that means at the time of the slaughter, at the time of the spraying of the blood, there was a kosher Pesach here. And everything was done correctly. It was slaughtered correctly. The blood was sprayed correctly. Everything was tahar. Everything was pure. Nothing was contaminated. So at the point of slaughtering, everything's cool. The problem only is I can't eat because I don't know which one I had in mind. So the eating becomes a problem. But since at the time of the slaughtering, it was certainly a perfectly good carbon, which means that it was royal achila. It was prepared to be eaten. It was perfectly capable of being eaten. It's got a side problem out of left field that the owner doesn't know which one he wants to eat. That's a different problem at the point of eating, but not at the point of things. So that's what's going on over there. Amar Abai. So says Abai, Eloi Shona, they didn't say that he's potter from bringing a second Pesach, a Pesach Sheni. Elo sheshochat after zerika. That's only where the master forgot which one he wanted, the sheep or the goat, after the avodah was completely done. The shechita, the slaughtering, the receiving of the blood, the carrying of the blood, and the spraying of the blood, the zerika, once the entire avodah was done. So during the period of the avodah being done, he knew which animal he wanted to eat. It was no problem. Everything was cool and copacetic. He forgot afterwards. Oh, okay. You forgot afterwards. You can't eat because of a technical problem. But at the point of the avodah, everything was cool, right? So there, because Elishashachat Achazarika, the Beina Nazrika Sadam, because when the blood was thrown, the food, the offering was still fit to be eaten. But if he forgot what his original intention was before the avodah was completed, in other words, before he sprayed the blood, he got his brain, what he called, so it went on the fritz, and he forgot what he had in mind. No, that means the chizuka dam lohabi chazila achila, which means at the time of the blood was thrown, he already was incapable of eating from it because he didn't know which one he wanted. In that case, he would, yes, have to bring a second Pesach. There's others that learn this from a Baraisa. The Baraisa says as follows. If 5 owners had the hides of the Pesach offering mixed up, if you remember, the hide, the R of the animal gets flayed and gets removed from the animal after the slaughtering, after the service is done. And so everybody has their own the hide from their own animal. Well, they were all put into a pile like blankets. They were both put like blankets or coats, and they got mixed up, and now nobody remembers whose is whose. And then and then they're looking at it and they find a wart on one of them, which was clearly a blemish, which means that one of the carbon Pesachs that was a blemished carbon Pesach, which means even though 5 were brought, really only 4 were good and 1 was no good. So the halach is as follows. Kulon yaitza lebeisa sreifo. All 5 kabbanis have to be burnt. But upeturim melasis pesach sheni. But all the owners are put from bringing a pesach sheni. And we're going to see. Now, just to lay the thing, we need to understand this. One of the owners definitely did not bring his first Pesach because one of them was blemished. One of them had a mum. And yet the Gemara is saying you have to burn them all because you can't eat from any of them because one of them clearly is not a Pesach. But on the other hand, everybody was already mekayim their mitzvah of bringing a Pesach, a carbon Pesach, and everyone, all of them, don't have to bring a Pesach sheni. How is that possible when one of them clearly did not bring the Pesach Rishi? Amar Abaya says Abaya, Lo Ishanu, they didn't learn this, that everyone is parted from bringing a Pesach sheni. Only when the hides got mixed up after the whole avodah, after the spraying of the blood, the be'inan, the zrikas dameha, because at least at the time when the blood was thrown, the offerings were fit for eating. But if it was thrown before, if it got mixed up before the blood was thrown, so by the time that the blood got thrown, everything got mixed up. They all have to bring a Pesach Sheni. So it says the Gemara like this: Man the Masni Amasisen, the one who taught Abayi's qualification in our Mishnah, a kol shekain Abarisa, certainly by the Brisa. Our Mishnah was that what happened was that the emes, all the animals were good. Both animals were good animals. It's just that the owner forgot. The problem was in the owner, the Gavra. The person forgot whether he wanted a sheep or a goat. And Abai said, well, if you forget before we do the Zerikas Adam, before we do the spraying of the blood, and you got to, what do you call it, then you got to bring in Pesach Sheni. If he says that over there where the animals are actually perfectly good, then he's certainly going to agree with the Baraisa where one of the animals is certainly no good, that certainly has a blemish, is certainly no good. Does everybody understand that? If Madach in the Mishnah, where all the animals in essence are perfectly good, they're all non-blemished animals, they're pure, perfect animals. The only problem is that he forgot. So, and over there we say if he forgets before the throwing of the blood, that's it. They're all gone. You got to bring the Pesach Sheni. Then certainly in a case where one of them is no good, though that rule would certainly apply. But according to the Masni Abaraisa, but according to the one that learned the Abayi's qualification only in the Baraisa, but he would not apply it to our Mishnah. Why? Since the offerings themselves are valid, because if he would remember, he would go, oh yeah, I wrote it down, I wanted a sheep, right? He would certainly be allowed to eat the sheep because there's nothing inherently wrong with the animals. The animals were brought correctly, the Zerika was done correctly, and there's no problem with them. The problem was with him and his memory. So if he would remember, they would eat it, right? The itkahabi chazilachilo kame dishmaya galia. Therefore, it's enough that it's revealed before heaven which one would have been the one that he wanted. So therefore, even though at the very fact he cannot eat from it because of the doubt of which one he had in mind, but that's only a problem in him, in his failure to remember, right? In the essence of the carbon, there's no issue. So over here, if the one who said Abayi's qualification of that if you forget before Zerika, that's only in a case of the cases of the wart on the skin, on the hide. There, where there's definitely one of the karbanos is no good, over there we'd have the qualification of whether before Zerika you found it or after Zerika. Says the Gemara. Now we're going to go discuss this very Baraisa. Says the Gemara, what did the Baraisa say? That in the case of the blemished skin, right, everybody, if it was done before Zerika, if you found it after Zerika, the animals have to be burned. You can't eat from them, but nobody has to bring a Pesach Sheni. All 5 guys are good to go. They're covered their Pesach. Frank the Gemara, how is that possible? One of them, one of the owners, definitely was not Mekayim his mitzvah and Karban Pesach. He brought an animal that was blemished. So how could you say that all 5 are potter from Pesach Sheni? Right? It doesn't make any sense. We're now on 88b4. 88b4. So says the Gemara, Mishum de lo yefsha, because there's no way for them to fulfill their commandment of bringing the Karban Pesach otherwise. Hey Chilabi, what should they do? Leise kol chad v'chad Pesach. Should all five of them, each one of them, bring a Pesach Sheni? They should all bring the second Pesach in the ER, Yud they should bring it, because one of them definitely didn't bring the first Pesach, but we don't know which one. So as a matter of doubt, they should all bring a second Pesach, but that's no good. That means you would be bringing chulin into the Azara. The rule is that a carbon that you do not have to bring, an offering that you do not have to bring, is not allowed to go into the Beis HaMikdash. So 4 of those Pesach Shenis are not necessary. I don't know which 4, but 4 of them will be unnecessary. We'll run into the problem of Chulin LeAzara, the Arba Minayu Obed Yehu, since 4 of them already made the Pesach. So should you say, Yehei Kula Chad Pesach? So let me make it simple. Let them only bring 1 Pesach Sheni, 1 second Pesach. Okay? Only 1 second Pesach. All right? If they bring only 1 second Pesach, so they're all registered on this 1 Pesach. Says the Gemara, then you solve your problem. You only have 1 animal. You won't have Chulin Ba'azara because one person on this animal certainly needed to bring this specific animal to cover his Pesach Sheni obligation. But the problem with that is, Nimtza Pesach Nechol Shalolim Yonai. But then it turns out that the Pesach is being offered with people who are not registered on it, and that's a problem. We know from the Pasuk you're not allowed to bring a Korban Pesach only with the intent to slaughter it and do the avodah for those who are registered on it. But 4 of those people are not registered on it because they don't have to bring, because they covered their obligation with the first Pesach. Now, the truth of the matter is this Gemara is unbelievably schwer. It's very hard. Because the first problem was, Kamaise Chulin Azar. The whole problem was you might bring Chulin, unconsecrated things, into the Azara. But that shouldn't be a problem. Because Asay Doicha Lois Asay. The Asay of having to bring my Korban Pesach should push off the Lois Asay of bringing Chulin into the Azara. Except the question is not a question. Because 4 of them don't have the mitzvah saseh. 4 of them already were Mekayah in their mitzvah with the first Pesach. So now you run into the problem. For the one guy, you might be able to say, aseh, saseh. But for the 4 guys who actually already covered their obligation back in the regular time on Erev Pesach, there's no aseh to be doicha the loisa say chulam ba'azor. That's why the Gemara doesn't go into doesn't even ask that question, because the answer is obvious. So says the Gemara over here. Now we have the problem: if you only want to bring 1 carbon, you're going to have people registered on it that are not. People registered on it that are not. We're going to slaughter it for people that are actually not registered on it. So says the Gemara. Hi, Mike. 1 second. You say I don't have a way out of it. I'll give you a way out of it. We say, Kol Chad Minayu Pitzche V'Nisnei B'Nemo. Let each one of them bring their own Pesach Sheni and make the following Tanai, the following condition. Ididi Balmum, if my original offering was the one with the blemish, Hai Da'asi Hashtanicha Pesach, the animal that I'm bringing now will cover my Pesach offering. The Ididi Tom. But if my offering original was unblemished, and therefore I was already Mekayah my mitzvah of bringing the Korban Pesach, the one I'm bringing now will be a Shalomim. So great, a Shalomim is perfect. You've covered your problem. It's no longer Chulin Ba'azara. It's no longer unconsecrated things in the Azara. And I've got to take it care of. Why can't I do this? Says the Gemara Lo Yefshi, you can't do that. And now we're on today's daf. Pei Tes Amud Aleph. Mishum de'ikah chaza b'shoy. By a shlomim, you have to give the matnas kahuna. Every kohen gets part of your animal. It's true. A shlomim, you get to eat most of it, but still the breast and the right hind leg of the shlomim have to go to the Kahanim who da'achalei. It's eaten only by the Kahanim. Ma she'ein came the Korban Pesach. There is no matnas karuna. The Korban Pesach does not have any presence to the Kohen. The Kohen does not get the chazak v'shoik. He doesn't get the breast and the right hind leg. So since he doesn't get that, now I've got a problem. I can't go ahead and do this. I can't make this condition. If it's a Pesach, if so it's my Pesach. If mine wasn't the blemished one, it's a shlomim. But now what do you do with the chazak v'shoik? What do you do with the breast and the hind leg? If it's a Pesach, you're supposed to eat it. If it's not a Pesach, it's a shlomim, you're supposed to give it to the kohen. I don't know what to do. If I don't know what to do, I can't make it. Go ahead, Daddy.
Why can't the kohen be Michael and say, okay, I don't need the chazak v'shoik.
Okay, so the answer is
he could be Michael.
Right. So first of all, so hold that question. Right. So hold that question, because let's get to the point of view of the kohen, and then I'm going to come back to that question and I give you the answer to that. V'nisni kol chad v'chad kohen behedye. First, let's each one of them find 5 different kahanim. Each one register a kohen on their animal, and we're good to go. There. Now, if a kohen is if the kohen is what do you call part of the is part of my carbon over here, so he's next to the kohen, he could eat the chazak v'shoik, and I've covered my problem. So the Gemara, hi kohen, heichidami. What's going to be with this kohen? Either of it Pesach, if he already made his own Pesach, he can't be on this Pesach. He can't be registered on the new Pesach. Dilma hi Pesachu. Perhaps it is a Pesach, but then it's a Pesach, and then the Pesach will have been slaughtered for somebody who's not actually registered on him, right? You can't have intent for the kohen if, in fact, he already brought his Pesach. So you're going to say either loy ovid Pesach, right? And if the kohen did not bring his own Pesach, so now he wants to join in with you in order to cover his obligation of bringing the Pesach Sheni, Dilma Shalominu. Maybe it's a shalomim, because maybe the original owners were the right, their karbonis was the perfectly good one back in the day, and they're not the owners of the blemished hide, right? So theirs really is a shlomim. And if it's a shlomim below over Pesach, then the kohen will not have done the Pesach. And Benisni, so said like this, Benisni kol chamisha chad kohen. So let all 5 owners, which means one of them who definitely didn't bring a carbon Pesach in the first place, hire one kohen, the loy obat Pesach, who had not yet made a Pesach, v'nimno alayu hani chamish pesachim, and register him on all 5 of these pesachim. The memorashach ikercha the loy obat Pesach, because regardless, one of the guys is now first bringing his first Pesach Sheni, because one of the guys didn't bring his Pesach Rishon because he had the blemished animal. The kohen will fulfill to this one animal. So says the Gemara, Elamishum the Komemayit Bachila Shlomim. But now you got a problem, but that in that case, because each owner will possibly diminish the time for eating the Shlomim. The Ilu Pesach L'Yom V'Layla. Pesach is only eaten by night, the night of the 15th, one night. And it says Yom V'Layla only because of the next words. The ilu shlomim l'shnei yomim b'layla echad. But a shlomim is eaten for 2 days. The day it's sacrificed, the night, and the next day. For 2 days and 1 night. While the Pesach is only eaten by the night. It says yom b'layla, probably just to get the language correct. Because by shlomim you have to say l'shnei yomim b'layla echad. So by Pesach it said yom b'layla. But only b'layla. So says the Gemara, v'nisni moisa b'hei ha-Pesach. So Daddy, to your question about the kohen, it doesn't work that way. First of all, we do not work off. You know the rule that we always do a lot, we tell the kohen to walk out of the shul in case we want to give a Yisrael the aliyah. The truth is that's not oiskalten. It's not really oiskalten. The mitzvah vikidashtoi, the mitzvah to be mekadesh, to make holy the kohen, is not a din in the kohen, Daddy. It's a din in us. Vikidashtoi. We have to make the kohen holy. We give the kohen first. So the kohen can't be moichel my. The kohen cannot be moichel my chiyuv. My chiyuv is to give him kosher. So what the kohen is going to do has no effect at the time of the slaughtering. At the time of the slaughtering, I have to give him the chazak v'shoy. Later on, he could say, you know what, I don't want it, it's okay. You don't have to give it to me. But at the point of the shechita, of the avodah, it's not up to the kohen. It's up to me. And I have a mitzvah of the kiddushtay. I got to give it to him. So I have no way out of just because the kohen is later on is going to forgive. That's good. And I'll show you where this applies, Daddy. Everybody knows. Av shemoichel al kavodah is kavodah moichel. A father who forgives on his honor is forgiven. That does not mean that you're allowed to start calling him by the first name. Says the Darkei Moshe in the Shulchan Aruch, says the Darkei Moshe, even though your father forgives, you still have to honor him. Because the truth of the matter is, who's the mitzvah? The mitzvah is on me. It says, Kabed es avicha v'yesimecha. Honor your father and mother. It's my mitzvah. How could my father go and go ahead and take away my obligation? It's not his obligation to be honored. It's my obligation to honor him. So the answer, of course, is, but because he's my father, he's essentially saying my honor is by you not honoring me. That's what he's doing. He's changing the terms of honoring. To which the Darkei Moshe says that works only to a point. That works only to a point. It's not carte blanche. He can change a few little things. So for an example, if your father and your mother are in one place, and your father says, bring me food, and your mother says, bring me food, the halacha is you have to bring your father first. Okay, because the wife is mechuyev to be mechabed the husband, so the husband goes first. But if your father says, I'm moichel, I forgive, serve mommy first, which every good husband does immediately when his kids are born. That's the first thing he does. He whispers into the baby's ears, listen, if mommy asks for something and I ask for something, do me a favor and give it to mommy first, right? Then he could forgive. But if your father would say, you're allowed to sit in my chair, you're allowed to call me by my first name, absolutely not. That you cannot do. Covered that would be bifahesya, would be public. That's not forgivable. The father can try to forgive it, but he can't forgive it because at the end of the day, it's not his obligation. It's my obligation. Same thing with the kohen. The kohen can go ahead after the fact. After he gets the chazak v'shoik, he can say, I forgive it, it's okay, you guys can have it. But at the point of the beginning of the carbon, he has no yad to say that. It's not his command. It's my commandment to give it. And not only do I have a commandment to give him, I have a commandment to make him holy, the kiddushtay. That's why the truth is we're really not allowed to ask a kohen to leave the besmedish in order for somebody else to get an aliyah. It's very, very fish. And I'll tell you something else. A kohen that goes ahead and says, by Birchas HaMazon, so when we do Zimun, right, we do a Rabbi Say Nivarech, Rabbi Say we want to bench. If there is a kohen in the place, he gets kadima. He's supposed to get the benching. So every kohen goes, oh, I'm moichel. Not so simple. He's being moichel our obligation. It's not a simple business. It's really not so simple. The truth is we need to insist, you're the kohen, you're supposed to go. Don't take away our mitzvah of the kiddushtay. Right? That's the way you have to look at it. It's not a simple thing, this forgiving thing. We're too flippant about it. Anyways, back to the Gemara. V'nei simoisa Pesach v'neima, but let each of them bring a residual Pesach. What's a residual Pesach? If a guy has his Pesach and it gets lost, so he goes ahead and he has to buy another sheep to bring. And then in the meantime, they find the first one just became a residual. became an extra one. And now you got to sort of get rid of it, right? It's got to get a mum, it's got to, you let it graze, you let it get some blemish and all that. So he's saying over here, Nasi Moisa Pesach. So just get a second Pesach, a residual Pesach. Go to the pen where they sell the used cars, in this case, the used animals, and pick up a couple of used animals. That's what you do. That's what a residual is. It's not a new lease. It's an old car. You know, that what do you call it? The rental companies are selling the old rentals. So here's the case. Old animals, grab them. If my original Pesach was the blemished one, Pesach, then this animal which I'm bringing, is not an extra one, is actually my true Pesach. But if my original one was good, it was good, and therefore I already accomplished my obligation of bringing the common Pesach. Then this that I'm bringing is a shlomim. Because in fact, a moisa because a resurrection is also only eaten one night, so everything works out. Says the Gemara, can one designate originally a used behemoth as the first place behemoth to be used as his common Pesach? You could only do a residual if something happened. You lost the first one. You can't go out of your way to originally use it. So says the Gemara. And v'nitru naisi moisa Pesach. So the Gemara says it this. And it says v'nitru v'naisi moisa Pesach. And let them endeavor to find a residual Pesach. How in the world are they going to find residual Pesach? Right? They're going to have to go use the money. They're going to have to get the money. Each one would have to stipulate that this is my Pesach. In other words, if it's residual, then most of them are going to remain residual. And then what do the other four guys do? So Elam Mishum, so the Gemara goes away from this. Forget it. Comes to a much more simpler answer. Elam Mishum Semicha. Because of leaning. On every carbon, you have to lean on top of the carbon, either to gain atonement or as a way of praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because you say words while you're leaning over, you say Hallel while you're leaning over the animal. Leaning on the animal is sort of working with the animal because the animal is holding you up while you're leaning. So now, Elis Mishum Smicha, the Ilu Pesach Loi Boi Smicha, because the regular Pesach does not require smicha, v'ilu moisa b'ya smicha. But a residual Pesach does require leaning. It does require smicha. So this way, you get out of it. If everybody, you have all the Pesachs, all these residuals, you lean on it, you go ahead and you lean on it. It's a residual, regardless of whether it's your actual Pesach or not your actual Pesach. It's okay to lean on it. We got no problems. So says the Gemara. We're on 89.82.
The smicha is not makir. You don't have to do it.
Right. Daddy, that be 100%. The Gemara doesn't even get to that. My father just said that a carbon semicha, as we're going to see, doing semicha is only lechatchila in the first place. If you forgot to do the semicha, it doesn't affect the acceptance of the carbon. So that itself is an issue. But we don't even need to get to that. Let's first get to this one, 89.82. Hoteinach carbon anoshim. This is good about offerings brought by us guys, the men. Carbon noshim ma'ikar meima. What are you going to say about the women? The women are mechuyev to bring a carbon Pesach. Women don't lean on animals. We always protect the dignity and the modesty of our women. So the mitzvah of semicha is only on the men. Women don't have to do semicha, but they have to bring a carbon Pesach. So how are you going to answer this over here? And for the Gemara, it can't be done, and the reason it can't be done over here, because of the blood applications. The ilu Pesach matana achas. The Pesach requires only one application of its blood onto the corner, onto the mizbeach. Ve'ilu shlomim shtayim shehein arba. But a shlomim, or a residual Pesach, requires 2 applications that are 4. Because you do it on the Keren Zavius, on the corner. In the Lashon of the Gemara is Keren Zavius. Since every corner by definition is a right angle, right? So when you spray at the corner, you're actually spraying on 2 sides of the Mizbeach, right? On each side of the right angle. So you have 2 sprays, one on this side and one on that side, and together it's 2 that equal 4, which is completely different than the Pesach. So there again, you can't do it. Says the Gemara, no. My nafkamina. But it's not very similar to my father's question about Semicha. That's why I told him to hold on. Kol anitonin al mizbeach achitza, all blood applications that are done on the outside Mizbeach on the outside altar, the copper altar, shenitna b'matan achas kiper. That if the kohen only made 1 application, he didn't do the 2 that are 4. He only did 1. It's okay. The carbon is accepted, similar to semicha. Elamishum. So then the problem is like this: the ilu pesach b'sheficha. Pesach, the way the blood is applied is by pouring the blood onto one corner of the Mizbeach. The ilu shlomim, but the shlomim is bizarika, by spraying. It's not poured, it's sprayed. Says the Gemara, might not come in. Who cares? Well, Tanya, we learn, all bloods that really initially need to be brought by spraying, but if you by accident brought it and you poured the blood onto it, yatsa, that's the Gemara. Lechatchila nami? Absolutely not. We're looking at the first place, the right way to do the mitzvah. The right way to do the mitzvah is to do the blood applications the way you're supposed to do it. Or daddy, to do the smicha, not look for a side door to get away with technical reasons, getting away with some of the stuff that needs to get done. No, if you did it by accident and you poured it instead of spraying it, or you didn't do the samicha, the leaning, even though you should have, okay. But we're not going to learn the halacha in the first place that I'm going to allow these 5 guys to bring a Pesach Sheni, when 4 of them can't have a Pesach Sheni because they already were Mekayim the mitzvah with Pesach Rish. It's only in the hands of 1 guy. So there's no way to get all 5 guys to be able to bring a Pesach Sheni. So guess what? They can't bring a Pesach Sheni. None of them can bring a Pesach Sheni. Memela, 4 of them at the very least were Mekayim the mitzvah with the Pesach Rishon, with the first Rishon. And the one who wasn't Mekayim at all, nobody knows who he is. So we don't worry about it. Or to remind everybody of the story, like Rashi, that one year when he had the Seder, and an hour after the Seder, his granddaughter came over to him and said, Zaidi, we forgot to do the Afikomen. And Rashi said, no, next year. That's what he said. No, next year. That's it. You can't go back. I don't know what's going on. Next year. Very good. Says the Mishnah. Okay, now, I'm letting you know that this Mishnah is extraordinarily controversial. It's a very controversial Mishnah. It is brought as well in a Gemara in Masechtas Gittin, and I'm going to let's learn it first, and then I will ask you Rav Moshe Feinstein's question on this Gemara, which he wrote in the Dibros Moshe, and he bliped and he stayed with the Tzarech Ian Gobel. He had no answer. He said this requires great, intensive searching for an answer. If somebody says to his sons, I am going to slaughter the Pesach, and at the time I will have in mind whichever one of you, my children, get to Jerusalem first. As soon as the first son puts his head and the greater part of his body into the city of Yerushalayim, He's Zoiche in his portion that his father already slaughtered for him. And in fact, Umizake es Ochiv Imai, and he's Mizake his brothers as well. Says the Gemara. From here I might say, Shema Milo Yesh Pereira. That we can all over here that there's such a thing as retroactive determination. Because a person has to be registered on the animal when? At the time of the slaughter. At the time of the slaughter. And here the father was slaughtering and left the message, whoever will get here, I will slaughter on your behalf. So you see that the first guy who got there, retroactively we say that's who the father slaughtered it for it. Says Rabbi Yochanan, this has nothing to do with Yesh Bereira or Ein Bereira. Whether we say Huvru Dover Lemafreya, that it becomes clear retroactive determination or not. This is simply Kedei Lezarzim B'mitzvahs Ka'amar. You're dealing with little kids. This is simply to encourage them to be energetic, to come and do mitzvahs b'zerizos with quickly and to do it. This has nothing to do with it. This is the father. We learned it before. A father slaughters automatically for his little kids. A father, when he slaughters, automatically has in mind his banim ubanis haketanim, his young children. He's just trying to be mechanech them. Dekanami, and the proof that this has got nothing to do, this is only a case of chinuch. So he's saying, whoever will get it will be registered. I'll register you on the thing. But in fact, of course they're registered. Dekanami, diktoni, umizake och echav imoy. And he's mizake his brothers with him. That in truth the father registered them all right away before the animal was slaughtered. Shapir. It's good. Everybody's registered. And that they would not register at the beginning. And can they be registered on it after he slaughters the animal? No. Registering only goes until the moment of slaughtering. V'atanan, we learn, nimnin u'moishlim, people can register and remove themselves and withdraw from it, yedei mimenu ad sheyishchat, until the time of slaughtering. At the time of slaughtering, everything is fixed into place. Who's registered on it? Tananami, hachi, ma'isa v'kodmu bonois labonim. There was a case where the father made the speech, whoever will come up first, and the daughters made it to Yerushalayim before the sons. Horrors, right? And it says, and it turned out the daughters were energetic and the sons were lazy. Right? It was a famous story. But here's the question, everybody. Freit Ramosha, an unbelievable question. And he says, this is the way you educate your children? You lie to them? You tell them something that's not true? That whoever gets here first, that's who's going to be registered, when in fact they're already all registered to begin with. So just because you want to get them to learn how to do mitzvahs with energy, you lie to them? Says Ramosha, the din is, the halacha is, if your child comes to you and says, I'd like to have a lulav and esek for sukkahs, you're not allowed to buy for your child a pasul lulav or a pasul esrog. You have to buy for him. You're being mechadech him. You're educating him. You don't educate him with lies. You spend the money and you buy him a kosher lulav and esrog, because that's the chinuch. Otherwise, you're being mechadech him to lie and not use a perfect one. Break Ramosha, you're teaching them to lie. You're lying to them. This is not the way we teach. And Ramosha bleibt. This is in the Dibris Moshe, I think on Daf Chaf Hey in Gittin. And Ramosha bleibt in the Tzarech. He stays with the Tzarech in Gadol. He actually writes Tzarech in Gadol. This requires great iyun, great erudition. I don't have a simple answer for this. And it's a remarkable statement. And I once spoke on this, and I tried to come up with an answer, but the truth is, having twisted and turned it, because when it comes to chinuch, it's very hard. It's very hard. If you look at the halachas of chinuch, you can't be mechanech your kids by lying to them. Even though your intentions are good, but you're ultimately doing it wrong. So what's pshat in this Gemara? The truth is, at this moment in time, I don't know the answer to that question. Ramosha's question stands. And he doesn't have it. And sometimes my father used to tell me, when I was little and I tried to learn my father, it was like fire and water. Because my father said, no, you have a question, go further. And I would say, you have a question, how can you go further? Because you don't understand it. So my father used to say, no, sometimes you have a question, you go further. In fact, Rabbi Akiva Eger, the great Rabbi Akiva Eger, on many of the questions that he asks in Shas, answers, Tzarich and Gadol. It requires great erudition. Okay, you got a question. Okay, good. Now move on. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to move on to the next Mishnah. But I just thought that this Mishnah is very, very controversial. La'oi says the next Mishnah.
You got to leave over something to answer.
Yeah, you got something for Mashiach to answer and for us to argue on Mashiach. Right, on Eliyahu, exactly. Daddy, I'm not worried about we have things left over to ask Mashiach and Eliyahu. There's plenty of stuff to ask. There's plenty of stuff, but this one is a hard one. It's a great question by Ramosha. It's an amazing question. People can always register on a carbon Pesach as long as you don't put too many people on so that there'll be less than a volume of an olive for each person. Since the mitzvah is achila, to eat, and the sheer achila, the volume of achila, is always the size of an olive, so therefore you can register as many people on your sheet up to the point where everybody still has an olive size worth of meat to eat. All right? Like we just said, people could register and withdraw from the registration until the slaughter. Once it's slaughtered, that's it. It's fixed in place. Rav Shimon says, Ad she yizrek es adam. Now, in fact, Rav Shimon is not arguing with regard to registering. He agrees. Registering is only until the point of shechita. But he holds you can still withdraw from this Pesach and go on to a different Pesach up to the point of the end of the Avodah, the Zavikas Adam, the spraying of the blood. We are up to 89A4. 89A4. My Kamash Malon. What is the Mishnah teaching us? It's obvious that any people can register on a Pesach provided that they have enough for the sheer achila, they have enough for a volume of an olive. That even though one group was registered on it, that entire group is allowed to withdraw and you could even put a different group on it. The point is, it's kind of teaches the idea that as long as at the end of the day, at the point of the shechita, at the point of the sacrifice, the amount of people that are registered on it, each one has the capability of getting an olive's volume on a shirach kizayis in order to eat, it's good. Says the Gemara. And Rav Shimon disagreed. He said until the blood is thrown. Amar Abaye, machlokes l'moshech. The machlokes is only regarding withdrawing. The Rabbanon Savi miyois miseh. The pasuk says, and withdraw from being for a lamb. Mechiyusa diseh. From the life of the lamb. I.e., while the lamb is still alive, you can withdraw. The moment it's slaughtered, you can't withdraw anymore. Rav Shimon Saba, when I say the words miyois miseh, I mean mihavosa deseh, the circumstances of the seh. As long as the avodah, the service is still being done, i.e., the blood hasn't been thrown yet, we still can pull out. But to register, it's only until the moment of slaughtering. Even Rabbi Shimon agrees. The Amakra, because the pasuk says, according to the number of people, which is i.e. the number of people registered on the animal. V'hoda, and right afterwards it says, Tachoisu, it shall be counted. In other words, it says the law double lashon, and we had this before, the double language of menichtas nefashos. So it's alluding to the slaughter. That at the moment of the slaughter, you can't. That's where the registration ends. Tanya Namihochi, we actually learned it out straight in the Baraisa. People can register and withdraw until the slaughter. Rav Shimon, I agree, you can register only until the slaughter. But they can withdraw until the blood is thrown on the altar. We are now on Amud Beis. We have about another 10 minutes. Pay test Amud Beis. 89b1. Says the Mishnah, if one member of the group, you had a group of 10 guys on an animal, and one member of the group registers an 11th person to share in his portion, and he didn't ask rishus, he didn't ask permission from the other 9 guys in his group. Rishayin b'nei Chabura, the other members of the group, have the right to give him simply his portion. They can say, instead of sitting around globally, communally, to eat from one big tray, they're going to separate, they're going to cut it out into 10 different portions, and they're going to give him his one portion, and he can share his portion with his guests. And he eats together with his guests, and they eat, the other 9 guys eat in their own place. That is, in other words, the guest and him are forced to eat separately from the group. Says the Gemara. And this is an unbelievable teaching us halachis about what is the right, the midah tova, what is the proper mode of behavior. B'nei Chabura. If one of the members of the group is gluttonous, he has refined hands, meaning it's a nice way of saying he grabs more food than everybody else. He's a good food grabber. Do we have the right to tell him, say, you know what? We're not going to eat communally. We're going to cut it up into portions. Here's your portion. Now go away from us. Go eat somewhere else. Mi amrinam, do we say, Matzi amalahu, he can respond back, you accepted me into your group unconditionally, and therefore just because I'm a big chazer, and I'm a big pig, and I grab more food, tough luck on you guys. I do more, maybe not. They can say to him, when we accepted you, to rectify the sacrifice, to make sure that we have enough people here that the animal will be completely eaten up. We need to make sure we have enough people in our group, that there's enough people that the animal will be completely eaten up. We didn't accept you on the assumption that you're going to eat more than we do. We figured everybody's going to be mentioned. Everybody's going to eat their own portion. Tashma, says the Gemara, I'll tell you. Here, we can learn from our Mishnah. If one registers a guest on his portion, the members of the group are allowed to apportion individual portions to everybody, give him his own portion. And he eats by himself with his guests, and they eat by themselves. My time, what's the reason that they ejected him? Because he's similar to one whose hands are refined, who, in other words, is gluttonous, who grabs more food than their own. He brought along an uninvited guest. Of course, he was invited. He registered guest. He didn't tell his partners on it. The ease out to datach. If you want to say the Yadav Yafis Matzi Amalei, the one who's with the refined hands can say, you accepted me unconditionally, so that this person who registered extra people is just like this guy who said, who like one guy who's having too much food. He can say, look, you accept me unconditionally. The fact that I went ahead and I subcontracted out my portion, tough things I do. So you see the fact that they could do it. So it's a raya that somebody with refined hands, a gluttonous guy, cannot say, hey, you guys accepted me unconditionally. Amri, the Gemara says, no. Amri loy, no. Deya shines. People are added to a group. Because even if both of them, the original member and the guest, would only eat the same amount as all the other guests. In other words, they would only eat the one individual portion that goes to the original guy that's in the group. Matzi Omele, they have the right to say, we don't want a strange person eating with us. The guy is Jewish. It's the mitzvah of Carbon Pesach. It doesn't matter. Because the animal was registered together. You all registered on this animal and you all agreed to register as a group. As a group, you don't have to, it's not considered good midas to simply take other people that come jump in. So an example of this would be if a group bought tickets to the Siyam Hashas, right? Everybody by BJC bought tickets. My father's Daf Yomi in Borough Park bought tickets, so on and so forth. If other people joined in at the Siyam Hashas, you have the right to tell them, please move. This is our group. We registered for this group. That's not what he called. That's not your... Don't make me be a mensch because you're not being a mensch. You're not being a mensch will not be accepted. That's the correct mode of behavior. The correct mode of behavior is not to accept bad behavior. Interesting. Toshma. Go further. Hashamish she'ochel kazai. The waiter. We had this before about the waiter, who also obviously has to be registered on this Pesach because he has to be Mekayim his mitzvah Carbon Pesach. But he's a waiter for two of the Pesach Seders. Hashemesh she'ochel kazai is botza b'tzad hatana. A waiter who eats his portion of the Carbon Pesach, his olive volume, his shir kazayis of the Pesach, next to the oven while it's being roasted. If he's smart, he fills his stomach with it at that location because he's not allowed to eat it somewhere else because we have the rule that once you start eating the Pesach, you're not allowed to jump around. You're not allowed to go from table to table. Remember? Now, but if the other members of the group want to do him a favor, they can come to him next to the oven while he's preparing the food, and they can eat over there the Carbon Pesach. So now the Gemara analyzes. Ratzu in, he wants to, if they're willing, yes. Lo ratzu loy. They don't have to. V'amai, why don't they have to come over to leave over their name? Allahu kablinu. You accepted me. The waiter should say you accepted me into the group. And since I have to eat by the oven, I don't got choices. You should come eat by me. We see that one person in a group cannot force the rest of the group to do something unconditionally. 89b2, Shani Hassam, and this is on here is where we're going to stop. Shani Hassam, it's different in the case of a waiter. The Amri lay, because the other members can say to him, when we accepted you onto our covenant, it was with the intent that we would be troubling you to attend to us, that you would be our waiter. We would be driving you crazy as our waiter. But that you would drive us crazy and tell us what we have to eat to trouble us. That's not, we didn't accept you for that. This was a one-way trouble. We allowed you into our group so that we could trouble you to serve us. Not that you could trouble us, that we should serve you. Says the Gemara, Tashma, from this price, members of the group where one of them was gluttonous, was showing right to Chelka would say, take your portion and leave. But even if only 5 people hold a joint meal at some time during the year, and one of them, nothing to do with the Carbon Pesach, and one of them was gluttonous, was showing Tul Chelka would say, go and leave. So if you're in the restaurant and one guy is taking too much of the what do you call it, the communal plate that you guys brought together, you can kick him out and tell him take your portion and go eat somewhere else. My veloy oid. What Shema Mina from here is proof. My veloy oid. Loy mi boya karma. Loy mi boya Pesach. Where they can say to him, we accepted you to rectify this, the offering, that there should be enough people on it to eat the animal up. Not that you should eat too much. Even in the case of a joint meal, where it's only merely mere companionship. Where you go to the restaurant for mere companionship, you can go take your portion and leave. A little further. Who said, there was never a question to us that the glutton could be ejected. That was never the question. Here's the question. Are the members of the group of the Pesach permitted to divide the Pesach and give each one their individual portion? Or no, does the Pesach have to be eaten from a communal plate because you're all registered on this one Pesach? You all have to take communal portions. Tashma. Members of the group, or one of them was gluttonous, take your portion and go. Yod of Yafes in. If one of them is gluttonous, they can kick him out. Ein Yod of Yafes, but one of them, if it's not gluttonous, loy, no, you have to eat together from a communal plate. Shema Mina, unless there's a reason why you need to kick one guy out and therefore divide up everything into individual portions. Outside of that, you don't divide, you eat from one communal plate. Very good. This is where we're up to. We're up to Rav Papa, Rav Yehuna, the Rebbe of Yeshua.